Hey everyone, tonight we dim the lights, perhaps pull up a cozy blanket, and prepare for a journey back in time, not to mighty empires or grand battles, but to the shimmering, often perplexing world of Victorian culinary ambitions. Imagine, if you will, a grand dining table laden with crystal and silver flickering gaslight, illuminating a centerpiece that isn't a roasted fowl or a towering cake, but a wobbling, translucent dome, encasing. Well, that's precisely what we're about to uncover. You might spot a whole fish, its vacant eyes staring out from within a shimmering amber prison, or perhaps a mosaic of perfectly cubed ham and peas suspended in a clear, quivering jelly. It's a vision that might make your modern palate recoil, perhaps even question the very concept of edible. You probably won't survive this journey with your appetite entirely intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what time it is for you. Knowing you're out there in all your different time zones makes this shared experience even more special. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our adventure begins not in the elaborate kitchens of Victorian England, but far, far earlier in the surprising realm of ancient civilizations. When you think of gelatin, you probably conjure images of brightly colored, fruit-flavored desserts, perhaps wiggling on a child's plate. But the fundamental principle, the extraction of collagen from animal tissues to create a congealed substance, is an ancient art almost as old as cooking itself. You see, long before the Victorians decided to suspend entire banquets in shimmering amber, our ancestors were inadvertently and then quite deliberately utilizing this very property. Imagine hunter-gatherer societies maximizing every part of an animal. They wouldn't discard bones, hides, or hooves. These were vital resources. Slow simmering these parts, often for hours or even days, would naturally release collagen into the broth. As this broth cooled, especially in colder climates, it would congeal into a jelly-like substance. This wasn't Jello as we know it, mind you, but a practical, nutrient-dense, and highly portable food source. It was a way of preserving and consuming valuable nutrients from parts of the animal that might otherwise be difficult to chew or digest. You can almost picture them perhaps in an early settlement, scooping solidified broth from a cooled pot, a truly primitive yet effective form of food preparation. Historians still argue whether the initial discovery was accidental or the result of deliberate experimentation, but its utility was undeniable. Fast forward through the centuries and you find evidence of gelatinous dishes in various cultures. The Romans, with their penchant for elaborate banquets, certainly understood the concept of congealed foods, though their methods were labor-intensive and far removed from the powdered convenience we associate with modern gelatin. They would spend days boiling down animal parts, then straining and clarifying the resulting liquid to create clear, shimmering concoctions. These were less about flavor and more about texture and presentation, often forming the base for savory dishes that might include anything from fowl to fish. The sheer effort involved meant these were exclusive to the wealthy elite, a testament to their household's resources and their cook's dedication. The Middle Ages saw similar practices, particularly with aspic, derived from the Old French word aspic, referring to a kind of venomous snake, perhaps due to its cold, shimmering appearance, or more prosaically from a small shield reflecting the dish's shape. You would find these dishes gracing the tables of nobility, serving as both sustenance and spectacle. They were a marvel of preservation and culinary artistry, often molded into intricate shapes, solidifying a cook's reputation. The transformation of humble, often unappealing animal scraps into something beautiful and stable was nothing short of alchemical for its time. It's hard for us, with our instant gratification and prepackaged everything, to fully grasp the sheer effort involved in creating even a small amount of clear, palatable gelatin in these early eras. It truly was a luxury, a laborious testament to wealth and culinary prowess, setting the stage for its dramatic Victorian transformation. As you glide forward in time, you see the humble, laborious process of making gelatin begin its ascent from a mere practicality to a symbol of refined Victorian ambition. The 19th century, particularly the Victorian era, was a time of unprecedented change and industrialization, but also a period deeply concerned with outward appearances, social standing, and elaborate displays of wealth and leisure. It was in this fertile ground that gelatin, once a rustic byproduct of careful butchery, truly blossomed into a culinary superstar. You're no longer just boiling bones for sustenance. You're engaging in an intricate dance of science and artistry. Think about the Victorian mindset, a fascination with progress, a desire for order, and a meticulous attention to detail. Gelatin, with its ability to transform liquids into solid, often shimmering forms, perfectly encapsulated these ideals. It was in essence a culinary magic trick, allowing cooks to defy gravity and present food in entirely new, often gravity-defying ways. The clearer and more shimmering your gelatin, the more skilled your cook, and by extension, the more elevated your social standing. This wasn't merely food, it was edible architecture, a testament to a household's resources and taste. Before the mid-19th century, creating clear gelatin was an arduous task primarily confined to professional kitchens or very wealthy homes. You would spend hours, perhaps even days, simmering calves' feet or other animal parts, then painstakingly clarifying the resulting broth using egg whites or even sand. It was a process that demanded patient skill and an almost alchemical touch. The slightest impurity could cloud the final product, ruining the desired aesthetic. Imagine the frustration of a Victorian cook toiling over a bubbling pot for hours, only for a speck of fat or a stray bone fragment to mar their perfectly clear aspics. Historians still argue whether the pursuit of perfect clarity was driven more by hygiene concerns or by pure aesthetic vanity. But as the Victorian era progressed, the demand for such sophisticated dishes grew fueled by the burgeoning middle class eager to emulate the aristocracy. Cookbooks of the period began to feature increasingly complex gelatin recipes, pushing the boundaries of what could be suspended and molded. You'd find instructions not just for simple jellies, but for elaborate molded creations designed to impress. These weren't just recipes, they were blueprints for social ascension. Mastering a complex gelatin mold could elevate a dinner party from merely pleasant to truly unforgettable, a silent declaration of one's culinary prowess and access to resources. The shift wasn't just about technique, it was about aspiration. Victorian society was hierarchical, and food played a crucial role in displaying one's position. A wobbly, perfectly clear, elaborately molded gelatin dish wasn't just dessert, it was a statement. It said, "We have a cook with immense skill, we can afford the expensive ingredients, and we have the leisure time to appreciate such intricate presentations." You might attend a grand dinner and witness a shimmering salmon in aspic that looked more like a piece of art than something edible, its scales seemingly preserved within the translucent mass. The visual impact was paramount, often overshadowing the actual taste, a concept that, as we'll see, led to some truly peculiar combinations. The fascination extended beyond the dinner table. Gelatin became a subject of scientific curiosity, too. Chemists were beginning to understand the properties of collagen and how to isolate it more efficiently. This intellectual curiosity, combined with the social desire for convenience and display, set the stage for the dramatic advancements in gelatin production that would soon follow. The era was ripe for innovation, and gelatin, in its peculiar way, was right at the heart of it, jiggling its way into the cultural consciousness. It was poised to transform from a kitchen chore to an industrial product, ready to democratize, or at least attempt to democratize, culinary sophistication. You can almost hear the faint rustle of starched aprons and the gentle clinking of delicate molds as the age of gelatin truly began. Now, let's zoom in on how this once laborious culinary secret began its journey from the exclusive domain of the aristocracy to something more broadly accessible, traversing continents and social strata. The global journey of refined gelatin is a fascinating tale of scientific discovery, industrial ingenuity, and changing social aspirations. You're witnessing the shift from kitchen-bound alchemy to large-scale production, a transition that fundamentally changed what was possible on the Victorian dining table. For centuries, gelatin was largely a byproduct of meat processing, often made by boiling down hooves, bones, and other animal parts. This process was inefficient, inconsistent, and yielded a product that was often impure and difficult to clarify. Think of it as a thick, murky stock, rather than the clear, shimmering substance desired for elaborate molds. The breakthrough came not from a chef, but from the nascent food industry. The first significant step towards widespread availability arrived in the late 18th and early 19th centuries with the development of more systematic methods for extracting and refining gelatin. Early pioneers like the French inventor Jean-Pierre Papin, though not directly focused on gelatin for culinary use, contributed to the understanding of pressure cooking, which made collagen extraction more efficient. Later, industrial processes in France and Britain began to produce a more consistent, albeit still crude form of gelatin. This was often sold in flakes or sheets requiring rehydration and careful clarification by the home cook, but it was a vast improvement over boiling down your own animal carcasses. You can almost imagine the excitement in a Victorian kitchen when these first commercial forms of gelatin arrived, promising less drudgery and more consistent results. However, the real game-changer for the Anglo-American world came with the establishment of large-scale gelatin production in the United States. Names like Peter Cooper, an American industrialist and inventor, loom large here. Cooper, known for everything from railroads to the telegraph, also patented a method for producing granulated gelatin in 1845. His product, Cooper's gelatine, was essentially flavorless and uncolored, a pure protein base that could be used for a multitude of culinary applications. This granulated form was significantly easier for the average home cook to handle than the traditional sheets or flakes. No longer did you need to soak and melt cumbersome pieces. You could simply dissolve the granules in hot water. This innovation was critical. It shifted gelatin from an ingredient primarily for professional chefs to something accessible to the burgeoning middle class. You could now purchase a reliable, shelf-stable product from your local grocer, opening up a world of culinary possibilities that were previously out of reach. Historians still argue whether Cooper's genius lay in the actual chemical process or in his remarkably effective marketing and distribution of the product, making it a household name. Either way, his contribution was undeniable. The global journey was complete as these improved, more accessible forms of gelatin traveled across the Atlantic, further embedding themselves in British and American culinary traditions. Advertisements for pure gelatin or granulated gelatine began appearing in popular magazines and newspapers, promising ease and elegance. This wasn't just about selling a product, it was about selling a lifestyle. You were no longer simply making a dish, you were participating in a cultural phenomenon, a display of domestic sophistication that was now within reach of a wider segment of society. The Victorian dream of elaborate entertaining, once restricted to the very wealthy, was now being democratized, one shimmering, wobbly mold at a time. The stage was set for an explosion of creativity and sometimes outright bizarre culinary experimentation. With the advent of granulated gelatin, the culinary landscape of the Victorian era was set for a quiet but profound revolution. You're standing at the threshold of a kitchen transformation where the laborious alchemical process of making gelatin from scratch was finally being replaced by something remarkably simpler, even for its time. This wasn't about a single grand invention, but rather a confluence of smaller innovations and changing societal norms that pushed kitchen technology forward, making gelatin more accessible than ever. Think about the Victorian kitchen itself. It was far from the sterile appliance-laden spaces we know today. Cooking was a physical, often arduous task, relying heavily on manual labor and the precise control of heat from coal or wood fires. Yet within these constraints, ingenuity flourished. The development of improved cast-iron stoves, for instance, allowed for more consistent and controllable heat, which was crucial for dissolving gelatin evenly without scorching it. No more guesswork over an open hearth, you could now maintain a more steady simmer, leading to clearer, more reliable results. Beyond the stove, the rise of more sophisticated kitchen tools played a silent but significant role. Fine mesh strainers became more widely available, essential for ensuring a perfectly clear gelatin product free from any unsightly particles. While earlier cooks might have used cloth or even rudimentary sieves, these new tools allowed for a level of refinement previously difficult to achieve. Measuring cups and spoons, though still evolving in standardization, also contributed to more precise recipe execution, reducing the likelihood of culinary mishaps with sensitive ingredients like gelatin. You can almost hear the gentle clinking of metal as a Victorian cook meticulously measures out their ingredients, a stark contrast to the rough-and-ready methods of previous centuries. But perhaps one of the most impactful yet often overlooked technological advancements was the humble icebox. Before widespread refrigeration, keeping anything cool enough to set gelatin effectively, especially in warmer climates or during summer months, was a monumental challenge. Iceboxes, essentially insulated cabinets with a compartment for a block of ice, revolutionized this. You could now reliably chill and set your gelatin molds, ensuring they held their shape perfectly for serving. Imagine the frustration of spending hours on an elaborate mold only for it to melt into a sad puddle because you lacked adequate cooling. The icebox was a silent hero, enabling the widespread success of molded dishes. Historians still argue whether the invention of artificial ice or the refinement of ice harvesting and distribution had a greater impact on the proliferation of chilled dishes. This confluence of factors, granulated gelatin, better stoves, improved tools, and the icebox, meant that the average middle-class Victorian home could now attempt dishes that were once the sole preserve of aristocratic households, with their large staffs and dedicated larder rooms. Cookbooks, once filled with vague instructions, began to provide more detailed, almost scientific guidance on how to achieve perfectly set and clarified jellies. The language changed from descriptive to prescriptive, reflecting the new possibilities. Suddenly, the elaborate shimmering molds that symbolized elegance and sophistication were within reach of more people. A hostess could proudly present a quivering aspic at her dinner party, knowing she hadn't needed a team of servants to achieve it. This accessibility, combined with the Victorian love of novelty and display, created a perfect storm for the proliferation of gelatin-based dishes, setting the stage for some truly bizarre and wonderful culinary creations. You're about to see how this newfound ease unleashed an unexpected wave of culinary creativity, leading to combinations that would make your modern palate do a double take. With gelatin production democratized and kitchen technology improving, you now stand at the precipice of a uniquely Victorian culinary phenomenon, the aspic awakening. This wasn't merely about setting fruit in a sweet jelly. This was about encasing savory ingredients in shimmering, often translucent molds. For the Victorians, aspic was the ultimate expression of culinary art, a dish that combined scientific precision with aesthetic grandeur. But be warned, your modern sensibilities might find some of these creations challenging, to say the least. Imagine attending a grand Victorian dinner party. Amidst the roasted meats and elaborate pastries, your eyes are drawn to a centerpiece that wobbles ever so slightly. It's a magnificent, often towering mold of perfectly clear or subtly tinted gelatin, within which you can discern an organized tableau of ingredients. This was aspic, and its appeal was multifaceted. Firstly, it showcased the cook's skill in clarifying gelatin to a crystal-clear consistency, a feat in itself. Secondly, it demonstrated an artistic eye in arranging the internal components, creating a visually stunning, almost architectural edible sculpture. And thirdly, it was a practical way to present cold dishes, making them ideal for elaborate buffets or as part of a multi-course meal. The very word aspic itself evokes a sense of cold, savory elegance. Unlike sweet jellies, which often featured fruit and sugar aspics, were firmly rooted in the savory realm. They were made from rich meat or fish stocks, carefully clarified, and then often flavored with herb spices, and sometimes even a hint of wine or vinegar. The goal was a clean, pure taste that complemented the ingredients suspended within rather than overpowering them. You might encounter an aspic infused with the subtle notes of bay leaf and thyme, a delicate counterpoint to the savory contents. What went into these shimmering molds? Almost anything, it seems. Chicken ham, fish, eggs, and even vegetables were popular choices. The beauty was in the arrangement. You weren't just tossing ingredients in, you were meticulously layering them, creating patterns and scenes within the mold. A slice of hard-boiled egg might be carefully placed to represent a flower, or alternating layers of green peas and diced carrots might create a vibrant mosaic. Historians still argue whether the primary appeal of aspic was its visual spectacle or its presumed ability to preserve food in a more elegant manner. Consider the sheer variety. There were chicken aspics, often made with finely diced or shredded chicken, sometimes mixed with pimentos or green herbs for color. There were fish aspics, frequently featuring slices of cooked salmon or trout, artfully arranged to suggest a whole fish swimming in a gelatinous sea. And then there were the vegetable aspics, which might contain anything from green beans to cauliflower florets, sometimes even a combination presented in geometric patterns. The Victorians truly embraced the concept of edible art when it came to aspic. This era's fascination with aspic reflects a broader cultural trend, the glorification of domesticity and the art of homemaking. A perfectly executed aspic was a testament to the hostess's dedication, her skill, and her adherence to the highest standards of culinary etiquette. It was a dish that demanded time, precision, and an eye for beauty. And in a society that valued these qualities above all else, aspic reigned supreme. You can almost hear the hushed admiration around the dinner table as a perfectly unmolded aspic glistening under the gaslights was presented. It set the stage for even more peculiar jiggling concoctions to come. As you delve deeper into the aspic-laden world of Victorian dining, you encounter a particular category of gelatinous concoctions that might truly test your modern sensibilities. Meats in aspic. This wasn't merely a decorative accent. It was a primary way of presenting cold meats, transforming humble cuts into shimmering, often bizarre centerpieces. Prepare yourself, because some of these creations stretched the boundaries of what most people today consider appetizing. Imagine, if you dare, a grand Victorian buffet. Amidst the porcelain platters and silver tureens, a truly arresting sight takes center stage, a large, wobbly dome, perhaps subtly tinted a pale gold or a clear amber. Within this shimmering mass, you can clearly discern slices of ham, perfectly cubed chicken, or even, most alarmingly, a whole intact beef tongue. Yes, you heard that right. Beef tongue, its distinctive texture, preserved within a cool, quivering embrace of gelatin. It's the kind of dish that makes you question whether you've accidentally stumbled into a culinary fever dream. The logic behind these meaty aspics was rooted in a few Victorian practicalities and preferences. Firstly, they were excellent for cold buffets and picnics, as the gelatin helped to set the meat, making it easier to slice and serve without falling apart. Secondly, they offered a way to elevate less expensive cuts of meat. A humble boiled ham, when meticulously arranged and suspended in sparkling aspic, became a dish of elegance and sophistication. And thirdly, the Victorians had a profound appreciation for novelty and visual spectacle in their food. A dish that could be both food and art was highly prized. Let's talk specifics. Ham in aspic was a popular choice, Often cooked ham would be diced or cut into neat slices, then carefully arranged in a mold, perhaps alternating with layers of parsley or hard-boiled egg for color contrast. The gelatin would be made from a rich ham stock seasoned and clarified to perfection. You might even find recipes calling for a ham loaf suspended in a clear jelly, the gelatin acting as both binder and decorative casing. Then there was chicken aspic. This often involved shredded or finely diced chicken, sometimes mixed with peas, carrots, or even truffles for a touch of luxury. The chicken would be folded into the cooled but not yet set gelatin, and then poured into a mold. The challenge was to ensure the chicken was evenly distributed, not just sinking to the bottom. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for these dishes was presentation or an attempt at better preservation in the days before refrigeration was widespread. But perhaps the most iconic and, to modernize, most unsettling was tongue in aspic. This truly pushed the boundaries. A whole cooked beef or veal tongue would be carefully trimmed, often pressed into a tureen or loaf mold, and then enveloped in a savory gelatin made from its own cooking liquid, perhaps enriched with sherry or Madeira. The smooth, glistening surface of the aspic, contrasting with the distinct texture of the tongue within, was a sight that Victorian diners would have found perfectly acceptable, perhaps even delectable. You can almost see it now resting on a silver platter, a testament to a bygone era's adventurous palate. These meaty molds weren't just about showing off. They were also a clever way to utilize leftovers and make them appear fresh and appealing. A cold joint of meat could be given a new lease on life, transformed into an elegant presentation that bore little resemblance to its former, more mundane form. It was a testament to Victorian ingenuity and their determination to waste nothing, all while maintaining an impeccable facade of culinary refinement. From the solid heft of meaty aspics, you now cast your gaze upon the shimmering, gelatinous realm of the ocean. Prepare yourself, because Victorian Fitchy follies took the concept of suspension to entirely new and often perplexing depths. If you thought beef tongue in aspic was a challenge, imagine the delicate, often pungent aromas of fish encased in a quivering cold jelly. The Victorians, with their boundless enthusiasm for all things molded and presented, extended their gelatinous embrace to the bounty of the sea. Fish aspics were incredibly popular, especially for cold buffets, luncheons, and summer entertaining. The appeal was similar to meat aspics' presentation, perceived elegance, and the practical benefit of keeping food firm and tidy. But with fish, the stakes and sometimes the smells were considerably higher. Consider the star of many a Victorian fish, aspic salmon. Often cooked salmon, either flaked or in neat slices, would be meticulously arranged within a mold. The gelatin itself would be made from a delicate fish stock, carefully clarified to a sparkling transparency, sometimes subtly flavored with lemon dill or even a hint of cucumber. You might see artfully placed slices of hard-boiled egg or capers peeking through the clear jelly, creating a visual tableau that was both elegant and, to the modern eye, utterly bewildering. The cool, firm texture of the aspic was meant to complement the rich, flaky salmon, creating a contrast in texture that Victorians found delightful. But it wasn't just salmon. Trout, sole, and even herring found their way into these gelatinous prisons. Imagine a whole small trout poached and then carefully laid within a fish-shaped mold, completely encased in a clear aspic. Its eyes, though dulled by cooking, would stare out from its shimmering tomb, a silent, gelatin-bound sentinel on the dinner table. It's the kind of dish that whispers, "I'm here, I'm cold, and I'm definitely fish." You might even find tiny shrimp or prawns scattered within the jelly, adding little bursts of pink against the pale fish. Beyond the more common varieties, Victorian cooks sometimes ventured into truly experimental territory. There are accounts, though rarer, of smoked fish aspics, or even more daring combinations of different seafoods within a single mold. Think of a mosaic of flaked white fish, pink salmon, and tiny green peas, all suspended in a delicate lemon-flavored aspic. The sheer effort involved in preparing these dishes, especially clarifying the fish stock, so it remained pristine and flavor appropriate, was immense. Historians still argue whether the elaborate nature of these fish aspics was primarily a display of culinary skill or a desperate attempt to make cold fish more appealing in an era without modern refrigeration. The presentation often involved serving these aspics on beds of lettuce or garnished with fresh parsley, and lemon wedges providing a touch of green and a hint of acidity to cut through the richness. The gelatin was meant to be firm enough to hold its shape perfectly when unmolded, yet delicate enough to yield easily to a fork. It was a fine balance that separated the truly skilled Victorian cooks from the amateurs. These fishy follies stand as a testament to the Victorian era's unique culinary adventurousness and their unyielding dedication to aesthetic presentation. They remind you that beauty, especially in food, is often in the eye of the beholder, and that what one generation deems exquisite, another might find simply baffling. As you move from the depths of the sea, prepare for an even stranger transition, the incorporation of garden variety vegetables into these wobbly, savory concoctions. Having journeyed through the unsettling depths of meaty and fishy aspics, you now emerge into a slightly less alarming, though still profoundly strange category. Vegetable suspensions. The Victorians, ever keen on transforming the mundane into the magnificent, didn't shy away from encasing garden variety produce in shimmering gelatin. While perhaps less overtly shocking than a suspended tongue, these vegetable-laden jellies offer their own unique brand of culinary peculiarity. Imagine a light luncheon in a Victorian drawing room, the afternoon sun streaming through lace curtains. On the buffet, nestled among dainty sandwiches and delicate cakes, sits a mold that gleams like polished glass, its interior a mosaic of vibrant greens, oranges, and whites. This is a vegetable aspic, a testament to the Victorian belief that almost any foodstuff could be elevated through the magic of gelatin. The beauty of vegetable aspics lay in their visual appeal. Unlike the often monochromatic meat or fish aspics, these offered a canvas for color and pattern. Cooks would meticulously arrange blanched green beans, bright orange carrot rounds, tender green peas, and even cauliflower florets within the mold. The gelatin itself would often be a clear, savory vegetable stock, or sometimes lightly tinted with beet juice or spinach water to enhance the visual effect. You might see a perfect geometric arrangement with each vegetable occupying its own clear compartment, or a more organic scattering like tiny jewels suspended in amber. One popular variant was the tomato aspic. This often involved a rich, clarified tomato consommé set with gelatin and sometimes studded with celery bell peppers or even a hint of onion. It offered a tangy, refreshing counterpoint to richer main courses and was a common sight at summer gatherings. Another common sight was the celery aspic, often made with finely diced celery and a clear chicken or vegetable broth, sometimes with a touch of pimento for color. These vegetable aspics served multiple purposes. They were visually stunning, providing a vibrant splash of color to the often muted Victorian palate. They were also practical, serving as a cold side dish that could be prepared in advance, freeing up the cook for other duties closer to serving time. And in an era where raw vegetables were less commonly consumed than cooked, they offered a novel way to present produce. Historians still argue whether the primary appeal was the visual artistry or the supposed health benefits associated with consuming vegetables in this form. The precise arrangement was key. You didn't just dump the vegetables in. You layered them, waited for each layer to slightly set, and then added the next, creating distinct strata of color and texture. A perfectly executed vegetable aspic required patience and a steady hand, reflecting the Victorian obsession with order and precision in all aspects of life, including the kitchen. You can almost feel the gentle tremor in the cook's hand as they carefully lower the next delicate slice of carrot into the still-setting jelly. While perhaps less gastronomically adventurous than their meaty counterparts, these vegetable suspensions are no less indicative of the Victorian era's unique relationship with gelatin. They show a willingness to experiment, to blend the practical with the artistic, and to present even the most humble ingredients in a way that was both novel and elegant. They remind you that the Victorians saw gelatin not just as a setting agent, but as a medium for culinary expression, transforming everything from a simple pea to an entire fish into a wobbling work of art. Having explored the strange culinary crossroads where sweet met savory, you now turn your attention to the visual spectacle that truly defined Victorian gelatin creations, the emergence of fanciful forms. This wasn't just about setting food. It was about sculpting it, about transforming liquid into edible architecture, often with astonishing detail and flair. The molds themselves became works of art, enabling cooks to craft dishes that were as much about visual delight as they were about taste. Imagine walking into a Victorian dining room and your eyes immediately lock onto a quivering, translucent masterpiece. It might be a towering castle, complete with turrets and battlements, made entirely of shimmering aspic. Or perhaps a perfectly rendered fish, its gelatinous scales catching the gaslight laid out on a silver platter. These weren't simply bowls of Jello, they were carefully engineered, multifaceted sculptures, born from an era obsessed with intricate detail and decorative display. The widespread availability of diverse and elaborate gelatin molds was a key factor in this artistic explosion. Before the Victorian era, molds were often custom-made by coppersmiths and were therefore expensive and exclusive. But with the rise of industrial manufacturing, metal molds made from tin copper or Britannia metal became more affordable and widely available to the aspiring middle class. You could purchase molds in an astonishing array of shapes: animals, fish, chickens, rabbits, architectural wonders, cathedrals, pagodas, geometric patterns, fluted spiral-tiered, and even molds designed to mimic fruits or vegetables. You can almost hear the gentle clink as a Victorian cook carefully unlatches a two-piece mold, hoping for a perfect release. The process of using these molds was an art in itself. It wasn't as simple as pouring and chilling. For complex designs, cooks would often build the mold in layers, allowing each section to partially set before adding the next. This allowed for the inclusion of different colored jellies or carefully arranged ingredients, creating intricate internal patterns. For instance, a cook might pour a clear gelatin layer, allow it to set, then painstakingly arrange slices of hard-boiled egg or pimento, then pour another layer of gelatin, and so on. This meticulous layering created the illusion of depth and movement within the finished piece. The drive for these fanciful forms wasn't just about showing off the molds themselves, it was about showcasing the cook's skill and patience. A perfectly unmolded, blemish-free gelatin creation was a testament to domestic prowess. Any air bubbles, any cloudiness, any break in the delicate structure, and the illusion was shattered. Historians still argue whether the Victorians prioritized the visual impact of these molds over the actual flavor of the food within them. These molds were often displayed prominently on the dinner table, serving as grand centerpieces that sparked conversation and admiration. They were conversation starters, a visual feast that preceded the actual consumption. A perfectly executed gelatin mold could elevate a simple family dinner into an event, and a grand banquet into an unforgettable spectacle. You might even find them at more humble gatherings, albeit in simpler shapes, still striving for that touch of elegance. The Victorian era, with its penchant for ornamentation and its newfound industrial capabilities, found a perfect medium in gelatin. It was flexible, affordable in its processed form, and allowed for boundless creativity. The fancy forms weren't just about food, they were about aspiration, about transforming the mundane into the magical, and about creating a fleeting moment of beauty that was both consumed and admired. This obsession with aesthetics, you'll discover, runs deep in the Victorian approach to all things gelatinous. Having marveled at the architectural ambitions of Victorian gelatin molds, you now shift your focus to the driving force behind such elaborate displays, the era's profound aesthetic obsession. For the Victorians, food was not merely sustenance, it was a canvas for artistry, a vehicle for expressing social standing, and a reflection of their deep fascination with intricate detail and visual harmony. Gelatin, with its shimmering transparency and pliability, became the perfect medium for this culinary artistry. Imagine a grand Victorian banquet, a tableau designed to impress every sense. The centerpiece isn't just a dish, it's a meticulously crafted sculpture, perhaps a quivering, clear aspic, encasing a miniature garden of vegetables, or a multi-tiered sweet jelly adorned with delicate fruit patterns. This wasn't accidental. It was the result of a societal imperative where presentation was paramount, often overshadowing the actual taste. You might find yourself staring at a dish, admiring its beauty, almost forgetting it's meant to be eaten. This aesthetic drive was deeply rooted in Victorian values. The era was characterized by an explosion of decorative arts, from elaborate furniture to intricate lace and highly detailed architecture. This love for ornamentation naturally extended to the dining table. A meal was a performance, and the dishes served were props in this grand theatrical display. The more elaborate, the more visually stunning, the greater the impression on guests. A perfectly executed gelatin mold was a testament to the hostess's good taste, her wealth as it implied leisure time and skilled servants, and her dedication to the domestic arts. The clarity of the gelatin was particularly crucial to this aesthetic. Any cloudiness, any stray bubbles, or any hint of impurity would mar the desired effect of a perfectly translucent medium. Cooks would go to extraordinary lengths to clarify their gelatin, using processes involving egg whites or careful straining to achieve that coveted crystal-clear shimmer. This transparency allowed the internal components, be it slices of meat, vibrant vegetables, or colorful fruits, to be highlighted, appearing almost suspended in midair. It gave the impression of a delicate, almost ethereal quality, enhancing the overall visual drama. Historians still argue whether the pursuit of perfect clarity was driven more by a fear of hidden impurities or simply an unyielding commitment to visual perfection. Consider the meticulous arrangement of ingredients within the molds. This wasn't random scattering, it was deliberate design. Layers of contrasting colors and textures were carefully built, sometimes with a layer setting slightly before the next was poured, creating crisp lines and defined patterns. A Victorian cook might spend hours carefully placing individual peas, carrot rounds, or hard-boiled egg slices to create a mosaic effect. This precision reflected the era's broader emphasis on order and control, a desire to tame and perfect the natural world even in culinary form. This obsession with aesthetics wasn't confined to grand dinner parties. Even in more modest households, a beautifully presented jelly, perhaps in a simpler star or flower shape, was a source of pride. Cookbooks of the era devoted significant space to detailed instructions and illustrations for unmolding and garnishing gelatin dishes, emphasizing the importance of their visual appeal. You might find detailed sketches of perfectly arranged fruit segments on top of a sweet jelly, or a sprig of parsley strategically placed next to a savory aspic. It truly shows you how much they valued the appearance of their food. Ultimately, the Victorian aesthetic obsession transformed gelatin from a mere culinary ingredient into a powerful symbol of elegance, refinement, and artistic endeavor. It allowed them to create dishes that were ephemeral masterpieces, devoured in a single sitting, yet leaving a lasting impression of beauty and ingenuity. You've seen the Victorians' fascination with elaborate forms and aesthetic purity, and this brings you to a central truth of the era. Gelatin was not just food. It was a profound social status symbol. In a society deeply stratified and meticulously concerned with appearances, the ability to present shimmering, intricately molded gelatin dishes was a powerful declaration of wealth, leisure, and culinary sophistication. Imagine stepping into a Victorian drawing room or dining hall. Every detail from the cut of the hostess's gown to the polished silver on the table spoke volumes about the household's position. And among these silent declarations, a perfectly executed gelatin mold would shine literally and figuratively as a beacon of social standing. It wasn't merely a delicious treat. It was a testament to the fact that you possessed the means, the time, and the staff to produce such an elaborate creation. Consider the resources required. While granulated gelatin made the process easier than boiling down hooves, it still wasn't instant. It required quality ingredients, often expensive ones like clear meat stocks, imported fruits, if a sweet jelly or fine fish. More importantly, it demanded significant time and sanopor skill. To clarify gelatin to crystal perfection, to carefully arrange ingredients in intricate patterns, to perfectly unmold a complex design without breakage. These were not tasks for a hasty cook. They required patience, precision, and often the dedicated labor of a skilled domestic staff. Therefore, a complex gelatin dish wasn't just a sign of culinary aptitude, it was a visible manifestation of leisure. The hostess who could serve such a dish implied that she had enough free time to oversee its creation, or that her household was wealthy enough to employ cooks and scullery maids who did have that time. It was a subtle yet potent signal of a lifestyle far removed from manual labor or financial strain. You might see a jellied game terrine at an aristocrat's dinner, signifying access to hunting grounds and specialized cooks. Moreover, the novelty and exoticism of some ingredients, particularly in sweet jellies, further elevated gelatin's status. Imagine a clear jelly containing perfectly preserved segments of citrus fruit or exotic berries, perhaps even small candied flowers. In an era before global supply chains and widespread refrigeration, such ingredients were precious and costly, signifying connections to distant lands and considerable purchasing power. The sheer variety of molds available from humble stars to intricate architectural designs also played into this. The more complex and unique your molds, the more discerning your taste, and by extension, your social standing. Historians still argue whether the perceived health benefits of gelatin contributed significantly to its status, or if it was primarily an aesthetic and social phenomenon. The display of these dishes was often as important as their consumption. They were designed to be admired to spark conversation and admiration among guests. Cookbooks and domestic manuals of the era often featured illustrations of perfectly presented gelatin dishes, serving as aspirational blueprints for hostesses hoping to climb the social ladder. You wouldn't just whip up a ham and aspic for a casual weeknight meal. It was reserved for entertaining for occasions where an impression needed to be made. Ultimately, gelatin became a culinary shorthand for refinement. Its shimmering, almost ethereal quality, its ability to transform disparate ingredients into a cohesive, often beautiful whole, mirrored the Victorian aspiration for order, beauty, and social ascendancy. It was the edible embodiment of keeping up appearances, a wobbly yet steadfast testament to a household's place in the intricate social hierarchy. Having explored the societal significance of gelatin as a status symbol, you now gain intimate access to the very blueprints of Victorian culinary aspirations, the pies. Cookbook curiosities. These dusty tomes, filled with elaborate recipes and often perplexing instructions, reveal the true extent of the era's adventurous and sometimes alarming approach to Jello salads. Flipping through their brittle pages is like opening a window into a bygone palette. Imagine yourself in a Victorian kitchen, a well-worn cookbook open on the counter. The recipes aren't always precise by modern standards, often relying on intuition and the experience of the cook, a pinch of this, a good handful of that. But when it came to gelatin, they were surprisingly meticulous about clarity and setting. Yet the ingredient combinations often defy contemporary logic, leading to creations that swing wildly from the delightful to the utterly bizarre. One of the most common curiosities you'd encounter is the sheer volume of recipes for savory aspics. While we associate Jello with fruit and sugar Victorian cookbooks dedicated significant sections to dishes like jellied veal loaf, pigeon and aspic, or even oyster loaf with lemon aspic. These weren't considered appetizers. They were often substantial main courses or prominent components of a cold buffet. The instructions would guide you through boiling down bones for hours, clarifying the stock with eggshells and white wine, and then meticulously arranging the cooked meats or seafood before chilling. You can almost smell the rich, meaty aroma wafting from the pages. Then there's the peculiar integration of vegetables in ways that seem alien to us today. Beyond the typical peas and carrots, you might find recipes for jellied cauliflower salad, cucumber aspic, or even aspics that incorporate cooked beetroot, giving the jelly a startling, vibrant purple hue. These weren't just decorative. They were meant to be eaten as part of the savory dish, adding a textural, and for the Victorians, complementary flavor. Historians still argue whether these vegetable inclusions were a genuine culinary preference or a way to stretch ingredients during leaner times. But the real head-scratchers often involve the sweet and savory blends that truly blurred the lines. Imagine a recipe for chicken and cherry Jello salad, where cooked chicken is mixed with canned cherries and set in a light chicken broth gelatin. Or a prune and ham loaf in aspic, a combination that might make your eyebrows do a little dance of disbelief. These weren't aberrations. They were legitimate, often popular recipes designed to offer unexpected contrasts and showcase the versatility of gelatin. You might find a recipe for a tomato and pineapple jelly that explicitly calls for a savory base intended as a side dish, not a dessert. Cookbooks also provided intricate instructions for garnishing and presentation. It wasn't enough to simply unmold a dish, it had to be adorned. Slices of hard-boiled egg, sprigs of parsley, decorative cuts of lemon, or even carved vegetable garnishes were common additions, elevating the humble jelly to a work of art. The precise detailing in these instructions reveals the Victorian obsession with aesthetic perfection, making sure that every wobbling creation was picture perfect. These cookbook curiosities remind you that Victorian palates were far more diverse and experimental than we often assume. They embraced combinations that seem utterly confounding today, driven by a desire for novelty, an appreciation for elaborate presentation, and perhaps a slightly different understanding of flavor harmony. They truly believed that with enough gelatin, anything was possible at the dinner table. From the pages of those curious cookbooks, you now stumble upon the truly wild and often baffling combinations that defined Victorian gelatin cookery. The unholy alliances. This is where the Victorians, emboldened by their mastery of gelatin, threw caution to the wind and created flavor pairings that make you question everything you thought you knew about culinary harmony. Prepare for some eyebrow-raising concoctions. Imagine a dinner party where the hostess proudly presents a shimmering mold that defies easy categorization. It's neither purely sweet nor entirely savory, but a perplexing blend of both, often incorporating ingredients that to modern eyes seem utterly incompatible. These were the true Jello salads in their most extreme form, pushing the boundaries of what was considered acceptable or even palatable to suspend in a quivering mass. One particularly infamous alliance was the combination of savory meats with sweet fruits. Shay? While a delicate fruit chutney with roast pork might be acceptable today, the Victorians often took it much further. Consider recipes for chicken and orange aspic, where cooked chicken pieces would be suspended in a savory chicken broth-based gelatin, then interspersed with segments of fresh or canned oranges. The idea was to create a refreshing contrast, but for many today, the thought of sweet citrus mingling with cold jellied poultry is a jarring experience. You can almost feel the texture clash on your tongue. Even more startling were the combinations involving fish and fruit. Imagine a salmon and grapefruit aspic, where flaked salmon and grapefruit segments were set in a clear fish stock. The sharp acidity of the grapefruit, meant to cut through the richness of the salmon, would create a truly unique and for some deeply unsettling flavor profile. These weren't isolated incidents. Variations of these recipes appeared in numerous period cookbooks, suggesting a widespread acceptance of such peculiar pairings. Historians still argue whether these combinations were genuinely enjoyed or were more about showcasing culinary daring and the novelty of available ingredients. And it wasn't just fruit. Sometimes you'd find dairy products forming unlikely alliances. Consider the jellied cream cheese and olive loaf, a savory gelatin mold combining cream cheese, chopped olives, and sometimes even a dash of Worcestershire sauce, all set in a vegetable or chicken consommé. The creamy texture of the cheese against the firm jelly, punctuated by briny olives, created a multi-sensory experience that is distinctly Victorian. You might even find recipes that incorporate nuts like walnuts or pecans into otherwise savory meat or vegetable aspics, adding a crunchy element to the wobbly texture. These unholy alliances were often born from a spirit of culinary experimentation and a desire to maximize the versatility of gelatin. If you could suspend anything, why not everything? The Victorians didn't seem to possess the same rigid flavor categories that we often adhere to today. Their palates were more open perhaps to unexpected harmonies, or they simply valued novelty and presentation above all else. The sheer confidence with which these recipes were presented in cookbooks suggests a cultural acceptance of such daring combinations. Ultimately, these bizarre pairings serve as a fascinating reminder of how much culinary tastes can evolve over time. What was once considered an elegant and intriguing dish capable of impressing guests might now prompt a polite but firm refusal. They remind you that the past, even in its most delicious or least delicious forms, is truly a foreign country. You've bravely navigated the unholy alliances of Victorian gelatin, but prepare yourself for a deeper dive into the specific category of sweetened savories. This particular blend pushes the boundaries of modern culinary norms even further, deliberately mixing elements we consider strictly dessert-like with those we firmly categorize as dinner. It's a flavor paradox that truly highlights the unique palate of the Victorian era. Imagine a dish appearing on the table that looks like a dessert, shimmering perhaps with fruit suspended within, but carries the distinct undertone of meat or vegetables. This wasn't a mistake. It was an intentional and often celebrated culinary choice. The Victorians seemed to delight in the unexpected, in offering a taste experience that challenged conventional expectations. You might take a bite anticipating the sweetness of fruit, only to be met with a surprising hint of something far more robust. One classic example of a sweetened savory was the ubiquitous jellied chicken salad with grapes or pineapple. Shuck. While today we might add dried fruit to a chicken salad sandwich, the Victorians would often suspend cooked diced chicken in a light savory chicken, consommé-based gelatin, then generously intersperse it with fresh grapes, pineapple chunks, or even diced apples. The result was a dish that was undeniably savory, intended as part of a main course or a luncheon spread, yet possessed a pronounced sweetness from the fruit. It was a textural oddity, too, combining the softness of the chicken and fruit with the firm jiggle of the gelatin. Then there were the aspics that subtly incorporated sugar or sweet wines even when they were clearly savory dishes. A tomato aspic might have a touch of sugar to balance the acidity of the tomatoes, or a veal jelly might be flavored with a hint of port or sherry, blurring the lines between a main course and a restorative tonic. These subtle additions underscore the Victorian refusal to be confined by rigid flavor categories. They sought balance and complexity, even if that meant combining flavors we now keep strictly separate. Historians still argue whether this tendency stemmed from a lack of widespread refined sugar in earlier periods, leading to less defined sweet-savory distinctions, or a genuine preference for such complex tastes. Consider the role of fruit in these dishes. While modern savory dishes sometimes feature fruit, it's usually as a sharp counterpoint or a small garnish. In Victorian sweetened savories, fruit often played a starring role, becoming an integral part of the main body of the dish. Think of fruit suspended in a clear savory gelatin as the primary visual and textural element alongside the meat or vegetables. It wasn't just decorative, it was fundamental to the flavor profile. You might encounter a ham and apple jello where the sweetness of the apple was meant to complement the saltiness of the ham, all bound within a wobbly savory casing. These creations also highlight the Victorian love of combining different textures. The firm, cool gelatin, the soft fruit, the chew of the meat. Each element contributed to a multi-sensory experience that was highly valued. It wasn't about a single dominant flavor, but a tapestry of sensations that unfolded with every bite. The sheer inventiveness, even when baffling to our modern palates, is truly remarkable. Ultimately, these sweetened savories remind you that culinary evolution is not linear. What seems bizarre or even unappetizing to one generation might have been considered sophisticated and delicious by another. The Victorians, in their boundless enthusiasm for gelatin, created a fascinating chapter in culinary history, one that dared to combine the sugar bowl with the meat platter, blurring the lines in a way that still prompts a collective shudder, or perhaps a curious craving. Having navigated the sweet-savory paradox, you now face a truly practical yet endlessly amusing dilemma that plagued Victorian dinner parties, the very real question of dessert or dinner. For guests encountering a peculiar gelatin mold, the ambiguity of its flavor profile could lead to moments of genuine confusion, polite hesitation, and perhaps even a subtle internal panic about proper dining etiquette. Imagine yourself as a guest at a formal Victorian supper. The courses arrive with a certain predictable rhythm: soup, fish, roast, perhaps a game course. Then a new dish is presented. It shimmers, it wobbles, it's beautifully molded, and it contains, well, what does it contain is that ham and pineapple, or peas and grapes. Your internal culinary compass spins wildly. Is this a savory course meant to be eaten with a fork and knife alongside the main dishes, or is it a sweet, refreshing interlude, perhaps a prelude to a richer pudding? You might even catch a fleeting glimpse of confusion on your fellow diners' faces. This wasn't just a trivial matter. Victorian dining was governed by strict rules of etiquette. Eating the wrong dish at the wrong time or with the wrong utensil could be a subtle social gaffe. The host or hostess might offer a quick, almost imperceptible cue, but sometimes the ambiguity was part of the fun, a playful test of a guest's culinary sophistication. You'd have to rely on visual clues, the subtle aroma, or perhaps even a quick surreptitious glance at what the host was doing. Consider the jellied consommé. This was clearly a savory starter, often served in small cups or molded into delicate shapes. No ambiguity there. But then came dishes like tomato aspic with cottage cheese and olives, which might appear amidst the savory courses, yet its vibrant color and smooth texture could easily be mistaken for a sweet fruit jelly by the uninitiated. Or the perfection salad, a later but quintessential Victorian-style Jello salad that contained shredded cabbage carrots, bell peppers, and sometimes pineapple, all set in a lemon-flavored gelatin. Was this a salad, a side dish, or a bizarre dessert? The name, salad, suggested a savory accompaniment, but the presence of sugar and fruit could mislead. The confusion was compounded by the fact that Victorians often served multiple courses simultaneously or in rapid succession on a sprawling buffet. A guest might encounter a vast array of shimmering molds, sweet and savory side by side, leaving them to decipher the culinary intention of each quivering creation. it was a true test of observation and deduction. Historians still argue whether the Victorians genuinely enjoyed this ambiguity, or if it was simply a byproduct of their experimental culinary phase and the newness of gelatin. This blurring of lines reflects a period when culinary conventions were still very much in flux. The concept of a distinct, rigidly defined dessert course, as we know it today, was still solidifying. Earlier periods often interspersed sweet and savory dishes throughout a meal. The Victorians, with their newfound mastery of gelatin, leveraged this fluidity, creating dishes that deliberately played with expectations. So, as you attend that imaginary Victorian dinner party, you learn to approach each shimmering mold with a healthy dose of curiosity and a readiness for the unexpected. You might tentatively take a bite, bracing yourself for either a sweet surprise or a savory shock, knowing that in the world of Victorian Jello salads, the line between dessert and dinner was often a delightful or unsettling mystery. Having pondered the delicious or perhaps disorienting ambiguity of dessert versus dinner, you now stumble upon a very specific and surprising nemesis in the Victorian gelatin kitchen: the Great Pineapple Debate. While this might sound like a trivial matter, the humble pineapple posed a significant, almost scientific challenge to Victorian cooks and their shimmering gelatin creations, leading to many a culinary heartbreak. Imagine a Victorian cook painstakingly preparing an elaborate sweet jelly, envisioning perfect cubes of vibrant pineapple suspended like jewels. They've clarified the gelatin carefully arranged, the fruit chilled it with anticipation, only to return later and discover a sad, gooey, unset mess. The culprit: raw pineapple. You see, this wasn't merely a matter of taste or preference. It was a biochemical battleground that often left the gelatin victorious but utterly formless. The secret lies in an enzyme called bromelain, which is naturally present in raw pineapple. Bromelain is a protease, meaning it breaks down proteins. And what is gelatin at its core? It's a protein, specifically collagen. So when raw pineapple was introduced into a gelatin mixture, the bromelain would get to work swiftly breaking down the protein structure of the gelatin, preventing it from setting properly. It was like adding a tiny invisible army of protein destroyers to your wobbly masterpiece. You can almost hear the Victorian cook's sigh of exasperation as their beautiful creation stubbornly refused to solidify. This wasn't immediately understood by cooks. They would follow recipes, perhaps using fresh pineapple, and be utterly baffled by the repeated failures. The problem was particularly frustrating because canned pineapple, which had been heated during the canning process, didn't cause this issue. The heat denatured or destroyed the bromelain enzyme, rendering it harmless to the gelatin. So a cook might succeed with canned fruit, then fail spectacularly with fresh, leading to immense confusion. Historians still argue whether this widespread culinary mystery spurred early scientific curiosity into food enzymes or simply led to generations of frustrated Victorian cooks. Cookbooks of the era, initially silent on this enzymatic sabotage, eventually began to include warnings. You would see specific instructions: use only canned pineapple, or cook fresh pineapple thoroughly before adding to jelly. This shows a burgeoning understanding, even if it wasn't a full scientific explanation of the practical realities of food chemistry. The pineapple problem became a well-known culinary pitfall. It highlighted that even with all the new technologies and refined gelatin nature could still throw a wobbly wrench into the works. Other fruits also contain similar enzymes, though often in lesser concentrations, like kiwi and papayas. But pineapple, with its popularity and the potency of its bromelain, was the most notorious offender in the Victorian kitchen. It forced cooks to think more scientifically about their ingredients, moving beyond just flavor and texture to consider their underlying chemical properties. So as you picture a Victorian cook meticulously arranging fruit in a gleaming mold, remember the silent enzymatic drama unfolding. The Great Pineapple Debate wasn't just about a fruit. it was a testament to the scientific challenges that lay hidden within the seemingly simple act of cooking, turning a straightforward recipe into a potential unset disaster. It's a humorous yet insightful glimpse into the trials and tribulations of Victorian culinary ambition. Having narrowly escaped the enzymatic wrath of the pineapple, you now turn to another peculiar facet of Victorian gelatin lore, the often exaggerated, sometimes outright erroneous, gelatin's digestive claims. In an era obsessed with health, wellness, and self-improvement, gelatin was frequently touted not just as a culinary delight, but as a panacea for a variety of ailments, particularly those related to digestion. Imagine the Victorian dinner table, where a conversation might easily drift from politics to proper deportment to the latest health fads. Amidst discussions of tonics and elixirs, gelatin often found its place presented as a lightweight, easily digestible, and restorative food. The prevailing belief was that its delicate, shimmering form made it gentle on the stomach, particularly for invalids or those with delicate constitutions. You might find a doctor recommending a bowl of clear, unflavored calves' foot jelly to a patient recovering from an illness, believing it would aid their recovery without taxing their digestive system. The logic, though flawed by modern scientific understanding, seemed reasonable at the time. Gelatin was essentially cooked collagen, a protein that in its raw form is tough and difficult to digest. By breaking it down into a smooth, soluble substance, it was assumed to be pre-digested, offering nutrients in a readily absorbable form. This was particularly appealing in a time when understanding of nutrition and digestive physiology was still in its infancy. You can almost hear the earnest pronouncements of a Victorian physician prescribing a soothing jelly as a crucial part of a convalescent's diet. Beyond general digestibility, some believed gelatin could soothe inflamed stomachs, promote gut health, and even provide essential nutrients for bone and joint health. While we now know that gelatin is a source of amino acids, its direct impact on specific digestive ailments or bone health is far less significant than Victorians hoped. Nevertheless, these claims contributed to its widespread acceptance and popularity, not just as a frivolous dessert, but as a beneficial dietary staple. The emphasis on gelatin's health benefits was often highlighted in advertisements and domestic manuals. Brands selling granulated gelatin would emphasize its purity and nourishing qualities, promoting it as ideal for children, the elderly, and the infirm. It was often marketed as a wholesome food that could provide sustenance without burdening the body. This played into the Victorian desire for foods that were both palatable and purportedly therapeutic. Historians still argue whether these health claims were genuine beliefs or clever marketing ploys designed to boost sales in a health-conscious era. You might even find recipes specifically geared towards the invalid, offering variations of clear jellies flavored with mild essences or broths intended to be both comforting and restorative. These weren't the elaborate fruit and meat-filled concoctions of a grand dinner party, but rather simpler, more austere versions, designed purely for their perceived medicinal properties. This belief in gelatin's digestive prowess reminds you that historical food trends are often influenced by the scientific understanding or misunderstanding of the time. The Victorians, ever eager for a natural remedy and a way to improve their health, embraced gelatin, not just for its aesthetic appeal, but for its presumed, albeit overblown ability to aid the inner workings of the body. Having witnessed the Victorian belief in gelatin's benevolent digestive powers, you now delve into a less savory aspect of its history. The era of adulteration. While Peter Cooper and others championed pure gelatin, the industrial age, unfortunately, also brought with it the temptation to cut corners, leading to questionable additives and practices in the production of commercial gelatin. It's a reminder that not everything shimmering and clear was quite as pristine as it appeared. Imagine the burgeoning food industry of the 19th century. Regulations were scarce, scientific understanding of food safety was rudimentary, and the drive for profit was immense. In this environment, unscrupulous manufacturers sometimes engaged in practices that would make a modern consumer shudder. While gelatin itself derived from animal collagen is generally harmless, the methods of production and the substances added could sometimes be problematic. You might be buying a packet of pure gelatine, but what else, if anything, was truly mixed in? One primary concern was the source material. While high-quality gelatin came from carefully selected bones and hides, cheaper, less scrupulous manufacturers might use lower-grade or even questionable animal byproducts. The processing required to purify these less-than-ideal sources could be intense, potentially involving harsh chemicals that might not have been fully removed from the final product. The goal was to produce a cheap, clear powder regardless of the initial quality of the raw materials. Another form of adulteration involved bulking agents, seiden or hakyon fillers. To increase profits, some manufacturers might add cheaper substances to the gelatin powder, diluting its strength and purity. These could range from innocuous starches to more concerning, though rarely toxic, inert powders designed to add weight without adding value. The result was a product that didn't set as reliably or as clearly, much to the frustration of the home cook. You might be carefully following a recipe only for your jelly to turn out weak and cloudy, a silent victim of industrial chicanery. Historians still argue about the true extent of these adulteration practices, as reliable documentation from the time can be scarce. Furthermore, early coloring and flavoring agents for gelatin were not always as pure or safe as their modern counterparts. While much gelatin was sold unflavored, and uncolored flavored varieties did exist. These early food dyes, often derived from coal tar, could contain impurities that would be deemed unacceptable today. Similarly, artificial flavorings were in their infancy and sometimes had dubious origins. The vibrant hues of a berry-flavored jelly might have looked appealing, but the ingredients behind that color could be less so. The lack of robust consumer protection laws meant that buyers had to rely on the reputation of the brand, or simply learn through trial and error which products were reliable. Advertisements for pure or finest quality gelatin were common, directly appealing to a public increasingly aware of and concerned about food safety. This concern wasn't just about immediate illness, it was also about a generalized anxiety regarding the burgeoning industrial food system. The era of adulteration serves as a stark reminder that the advancements of the Victorian age also brought new challenges. While gelatin offered culinary wonders, its commercial production occasionally ventured into murky territory, leaving the consumer to navigate a landscape where not all that glittered or jiggled was gold. Leaving behind the unsavory topic of adulteration, you now step into the sunny, yet still peculiar world of Victorian outdoor dining. Picnic basket oddities. The picnic, a beloved Victorian pastime, was a chance to escape the formal dining room and enjoy nature, but the food packed for these excursions was often as elaborate and, crucially, as gelatinous as anything served indoors. Imagine a scene straight out of a pastoral painting, ladies in their finest frocks, gentlemen in their tailored suits lounging on checkered blankets beside a babbling brook. The picnic basket, however, was no humble hamper of sandwiches and crisps. It was a carefully curated collection of portable feasts, and among the most prized items were, of course, the various Jello salads. You see, gelatin, with its firm, stable structure, when chilled was perfectly suited for travel, ensuring that elaborate dishes arrived intact even after a bumpy carriage ride. The ideal picnic gelatin dish had to be robust enough to withstand transport, yet elegant enough to impress. This meant that many of the same aspics and jellies found at indoor buffets made their way into the great outdoors. You might find a meticulously prepared jellied ham loaf, sliced and arranged on a platter, its savory meat encased in a clear, shimmering aspic. The stability of the gelatin meant slices wouldn't crumble and the dish would remain visually appealing even after a journey. Then there were the savory vegetable aspects, often vibrant with peas, carrots, or green beans, providing a fresh, cool counterpoint to richer meats. These were ideal for a warm summer's day, offering a light, refreshing bite. Imagine pulling out a glistening perfection salad, a later but spiritually Victorian Jello salad with cabbage and carrots from a wicker basket, its cool, firm texture a welcome relief from the summer heat. Sweet jellies, too, were popular. While fresh fruit might bruise delicate fruit jellies, perhaps with carefully arranged berries or citrus segments, could be transported intact, offering a sweet and elegant dessert. You might even find individual molds small enough to be served as single portions, making them incredibly convenient for outdoor dining. These could range from a simple lemon jelly to a more intricate layered fruit trifle set in gelatin. Historians still debate whether the portability or the prestige associated with gelatin was the primary reason for its ubiquity in Victorian picnic baskets. The challenge, of course, was keeping these gelatinous wonders chilled on a warm day. Picnic baskets were often insulated with blankets or straw and sometimes packed with blocks of ice wrapped in cloth. The success of a picnic, particularly its gelatinous offerings, often hinged on the ingenuity of the packer in maintaining a cool temperature. You can almost feel the collective sigh of relief as a perfectly firm aspic is unveiled, having survived the journey unmelted. These picnic basket oddities remind you that the Victorians integrated their love of gelatin into every aspect of their social lives, transforming humble outdoor meals into opportunities for culinary display. The shimmering, wobbly forms that seemed so strange indoors now made perfect practical sense, ensuring that even a meal amidst nature could be a testament to Victorian elegance and meticulous planning. From the rolling hills of the Victorian picnic, you now step into the warm, inviting glow of the holiday home, where gelatin took on an even grander, more spectacular role. Holiday table spectacles. For the Victorians, festive occasions were the ultimate excuse for culinary extravagance, and gelatin molds, shimmering and elaborate, were often the dazzling centerpieces of these celebratory feasts. Imagine a grand Christmas dinner, the table groaning under the weight of roasted meats, plum puddings, and towering desserts. Amidst this bounty, your eyes are drawn to a magnificent, perhaps multi-tiered gelatin creation. It might be a clear jelly encasing bright red cranberries and slivers of nuts shaped like a winter wonderland. Or perhaps a more robust savory aspic sculpted into a festive fowl, its surface glistening under the candlelight. These weren't just dishes. They were edible monuments to festivity and abundance. The holiday table was the perfect stage for the most ambitious and visually stunning gelatin creations. The extended preparation time typically available during holidays allowed cooks to undertake truly complex molds, often involving multiple layers of different colored jellies or intricate arrangements of ingredients. Think of a terrine of game meats set in a rich, dark aspic shaped like a majestic castle, or a festive wreath adorned with decorative vegetable cutouts. These were not quickly assembled items. They were the culmination of hours, sometimes days, of meticulous work. For Christmas, sweet jellies often took on festive colors and flavors. Cranberry jellies, often with port wine or citrus, were popular, offering a vibrant red hue. You might also find jellies flavored with spices like cinnamon or ginger, mirroring the flavors of traditional holiday desserts. These would be molded into star shapes, wreaths, or even bell shapes, adding to the decorative theme of the table. You can almost smell the faint scent of spices mingling with the cool, clean aroma of the gelatin. Thanksgiving, too, saw its share of gelatinous grandeur. While the holiday, as we know it today, was still evolving, jellied salads and aspics were certainly present. A turkey aspic or a jellied cranberry salad would have been perfectly at home on a Victorian Thanksgiving spread, offering a cool, refreshing contrast to the rich, heavy roasted meats. Historians still argue whether the Victorians saw these holiday gelatin dishes as purely aesthetic centerpieces or as truly integral parts of the meal. The very act of presenting such a magnificent gelatin mold was a performance in itself. It showcased the host's generosity, the cook's immense skill, and the family's prosperity. It was a visual feast before the actual eating began eliciting gasps of admiration from guests. The delicate wobble as it was carried to the table, the perfect release from its elaborate mold, all added to the drama and spectacle. These holiday table spectacles remind you that for the Victorians, gelatin was more than just a food trend. It was a medium for celebrating life's grandest moments. It transformed ordinary ingredients into extraordinary displays, turning a simple meal into an unforgettable, shimmering, and often bewildering testament to the joy and abundance of the season. From the glittering grandeur of holiday tables, you now shrink your perspective to the delightful chaos of Victorian children's parties, where gelatin, in its most basic form, still made a curious appearance. While less elaborate than their adult counterparts, the chantrom, children's party, fare in gelatin was still capable of raising a modern eyebrow, blending playful colors with sometimes unappetizing textures. Imagine a Victorian child's birthday party, small hands reaching for sweet treats, bright ribbons, and the tinkling laughter of youthful merriment. Amidst the gingerbread and lemonade, you might spot a wobbly, brightly colored mound, perhaps in a simple star or animal shape. This was Jello, or its Victorian equivalent, usually sweet and fruit-flavored, but sometimes with surprising additions that aimed to be both wholesome and palatable for little ones. The emphasis here was on color and novelty. Unlike the sophisticated clarity demanded for adult aspics, children's jellies often embraced vibrant hues achieved through natural colorings, like beet juice for red or spinach for green, or increasingly, as the era progressed early, artificial food dyes. These vivid colors were meant to attract young eyes and stimulate appetites, turning simple sugar and gelatin into a visual treat. You can almost see a child's eyes widen at the sight of a shimmering, ruby-red jelly. While sweet fruit jellies were the most common, sometimes Victorian notions of healthful food for children led to curious combinations. You might encounter a milk jelly made with milk sugar and gelatin, sometimes flavored with vanilla or lemon. While harmless, the texture might be unfamiliar to a modern child accustomed to creamy custards. There were also instances where very finely chopped soft vegetables, like carrots or peas, were sometimes mixed into a very lightly sweetened or even savory gelatin, presented as a healthy snack for children. The idea was to sneak in vegetables in a novel, appealing form. Historians still argue whether children genuinely enjoyed these vegetable-infused jellies or if they were largely tolerated by polite Victorian offspring. The molds used for children's parties were typically simpler and more robust than the intricate adult molds. Animal shapes like rabbits or bears or simple geometric designs were common, making them easy for cooks to unmold successfully without fear of breakage, ensuring a perfect jiggle for the eager youngsters. The satisfaction of seeing a wobbly animal turn out perfectly must have been a small triumph for many a Victorian mother or nanny. These jellies were served cold, a refreshing treat in an age without constant refrigeration. They were easy for small hands to manage if firm enough and less messy than crumbling cakes. They also provided a source of protein and some sugar which was considered nourishing for growing children. So while the complex savory aspects were reserved for sophisticated adult palates, gelatin still found its way onto children's tables, albeit in a more simplified, colorful, and sometimes unexpectedly vegetable-laden form. It reminds you that the omnipresent jiggle of gelatin truly permeated every aspect of Victorian life, from the grandest banquet to the humblest children's tea party. You've traversed the peculiar landscape of Victorian gelatin, from grand feasts to children's parties, witnessing its rise to unparalleled culinary heights. But like all trends, even the mightiest jiggle eventually loses its momentum. You now approach a significant turning point. The aspic's demise. The once ubiquitous savory gelatin, the shimmering king of cold buffets, slowly but surely began to recede from popular taste, fading into a culinary footnote. Imagine the dawn of the 20th century. Society was changing rapidly, moving away from the ornate opulence of the Victorian era towards simpler, more streamlined aesthetics and practicalities. The elaborate, time-consuming preparation of aspics began to feel out of step with this new pace of life. Women, who were often the primary cooks in the home, were entering the workforce in greater numbers, and the desire for quicker, easier meals grew exponentially. The hours spent clarifying stock and meticulously arranging ingredients simply didn't fit the emerging modern lifestyle. The very qualities that made aspic so appealing to Victorians, its formality, its visual complexity, its cold, firm texture, began to be seen as drawbacks. The shift in culinary tastes favored fresher, less processed ingredients and lighter, more natural presentations. The idea of suspending perfectly good meat or fish in a shimmering cold jelly started to seem less like elegant artistry and more like an oddity. You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief from cooks who were no longer expected to produce these labor-intensive, often perplexing dishes. Furthermore, advancements in food preservation played a significant role. The widespread availability of refrigerations in homes, albeit initially in the form of iceboxes that became increasingly efficient, reduced the practical need for gelatin as a preservation method for cold dishes. Food could be kept fresh without needing to be encased in a proteinaceous prison. The necessity that partly fueled aspic's popularity diminished, leaving only its aesthetic and historical appeal, which quickly waned for a new generation. The rise of new culinary influences also contributed to its decline. American cuisine in particular began to assert its own identity, favoring simpler, more robust flavors and less formal presentations. The Jello salad, as we might recognize it today, often sweet and made with processed fruit, began its ascent, leaving savory aspics in the dust. The sophisticated, often subtle flavors of a well-made aspic were perhaps too complex, too subtle, for a palate increasingly drawn to bolder, more immediate tastes. Historians still argue whether the decline of aspic was a direct result of changing tastes or merely a casualty of broader societal shifts towards convenience. So the grand quivering aspic, once a symbol of culinary aspiration and social status, gently jiggled its way out of favor. It wasn't a dramatic collapse, but a gradual fading, a quiet retreat from the limelight as new culinary stars emerged. While sweet gelatin would continue to thrive, the savory aspic became a relic of a bygone era, a testament to a very specific moment in culinary history when anything seemed possible with a little bit of gelatin and a lot of ambition. As the savory aspic quietly retreated from the culinary stage, you witness a broader phenomenon: gelatin's decline in popularity. As a whole, while sweet Jello would find its niche, the general fervor for all things gelatinous, the sheer omnipresence that defined the Victorian era, began to wane. This wasn't a sudden fall from grace, but a gradual shift in culinary philosophy and a changing relationship with food. Imagine the early 20th century, a time of rapid social and technological change. The Victorian obsession with elaborate presentation with food as spectacle began to feel old-fashioned, even a bit stuffy. Simpler, more modern aesthetics emerged in interior design fashion and crucially in the kitchen. The grand quivering molds that once signified opulence now seemed overly fussy and time-consuming, out of step with the burgeoning desire for efficiency and speed. You can almost hear the sigh of relief from cooks and homemakers as the pressure to produce elaborate gelatin masterpieces lessened. A significant factor in this decline was the rise of new food processing techniques and ingredients. Canned goods became more sophisticated and varied, offering convenient alternatives to labor-intensive preparations. Frozen foods slowly began to emerge, providing easy access to ingredients previously out of season or difficult to preserve. These innovations reduced the practical need for gelatin as a binding or setting agent. Why spend hours preparing a jellied chicken loaf when you could simply roast a chicken? Furthermore, changing nutritional understanding played a subtle role. While Victorians lauded gelatin for its perceived digestive benefits, a more scientific approach to nutrition began to emerge in the 20th century. Focus shifted to vitamins, minerals, and caloric content. Gelatin, primarily a protein, didn't offer the same broad nutritional spectrum as fresh fruits, vegetables, and lean meats, diminishing its health food appeal. Historians still argue whether the decline was driven more by changing practicalities in the kitchen or an evolving, more scientific understanding of nutrition. The decline also reflected a broader shift in culinary taste. The bold, often strange combinations of sweet and savory that defined Victorian gelatin began to fall out of favor. Palates became more defined, preferring clearer distinctions between courses and flavors. The idea of a savory ham suspended in a sweet, wobbly jelly became an object of gentle ridicule rather than admiration. The sheer novelty wore off, and what was once avant-garde became simply dated. Even the molds themselves, once objects of desire, became less central to kitchenware. While simple molds for desserts continued to be popular, the intricate architectural molds for aspics slowly gathered dust in pantries, eventually becoming collector's items rather than everyday tools. You might stumble upon an old forgotten fish mold in a dusty attic, a silent relic of a bygone culinary era. So while sweet Jello would endure as a beloved children's treat and a quick dessert, the overall reign of gelatin as a culinary superstar dimmed. It became one ingredient among many, rather than the versatile, almost magical substance it once was. Its decline marked the end of a unique shimmering chapter in food history, paving the way for new culinary trends and a very different relationship with our food. Despite the general fading of gelatin's dominance, particularly for savory dishes, its influence didn't vanish entirely. You can still spot modern echoes of aspic in contemporary cuisine, subtle nods to that Victorian love affair with the shimmering molded form. While perhaps less overtly theatrical, the core idea of setting savory liquids or suspending ingredients in a gel continues to inspire chefs today. Imagine, if you will, a sleek modern restaurant where a delicate cube of shimmering substance sits on a tasting menu alongside more familiar fare. This might be a savory consommé gelée, a highly refined version of the Victorian aspic. Chefs today use agar-agar, a plant-based gelling agent, or highly purified gelatin to create intensely flavored crystal-clear gels from ingredients like tomato water, mushroom broth, or even dashi, a Japanese stock. These are often served as an amuse-bouche, a delicate palate cleanser, or a component in a more complex dish, offering a burst of concentrated flavor and a unique textural experience. You might spoon up a tiny quivering square of chilled tomato essence, its flavor far more intense than any raw tomato could offer. Another modern echo can be found in the world of forfis, pâtés, and terrines. While often bound by fat or natural proteins, some classic recipes for meat or vegetable terrines still incorporate a layer of aspic on top or around the edges. This isn't just for historical homage. The aspic helps to preserve the freshness, add a glossy finish, and create a satisfying textural contrast with the richer, more substantial terrine. Think of a perfectly prepared country pâté topped with a thin, glistening layer of clear jelly, a direct descendant of those Victorian meat aspics, albeit far more refined and less likely to contain an entire beef tongue. Even in molecular gastronomy, you find chefs playing with the concept of gels and foams, though often on a micro scale. While not always directly tied to Victorian aspics, the fundamental idea of transforming liquids into solid or semi-solid forms for textural and flavor impact owes a debt to those early gelatin experimenters. The Victorian fascination with controlled textures and unexpected presentations continues to find expression in cutting-edge culinary techniques. Historians still argue whether this resurgence of gel-based dishes is a genuine appreciation for the form or merely a cyclical return of culinary trends. Furthermore, the very concept of a salad in a mold, though largely relegated to kitsch in the mid-20th century, has seen a very quiet, very niche comeback in some contemporary reinterpretations. You might occasionally find a chef creating a deconstructed Jello salad as a playful nod to the past, using fresh, high-quality ingredients and a much lighter touch with the gelatin. These are often presented ironically, but still demonstrate the enduring fascination with the form. So while the Victorian aspic in its full bizarre glory is largely confined to history books, its underlying principles, the transformative power of gelatin, the art of suspension, and the appeal of textural contrast continue to resonate. These modern echoes are a testament to the enduring, if sometimes perplexing, legacy of the jiggling wonders that once graced every respectable Victorian table. Having observed the sophisticated if subtle modern echoes of savory aspics, you now pivot to the truly remarkable survivor of the gelatin craze: the enduring sweet Jello. While its savory siblings faded into obscurity, sweet fruit-flavored gelatin not only persisted, but thrived, transforming from a Victorian delicacy into an iconic 20th century staple beloved by generations. Imagine the turn of the century as the elaborate aspic molds were being relegated to attics. At the very same time, a new kind of gelatin was blossoming, one focused purely on sweetness, vibrant colors, and effortless convenience. This was thanks in large part to the aggressive marketing and widespread adoption of powdered flavored gelatin pours, particularly brands like Jello. You see, the Victorian era had laid the groundwork for gelatin's acceptance, and now a new generation was ready for its more approachable, dessert-oriented incarnation. The key to its enduring appeal was simplicity. Unlike the complex, multi-layered aspics that required hours of preparation, sweet Jello was incredibly easy to make. You simply added hot water, stirred and chilled. This instant gratification perfectly aligned with the burgeoning desire for convenience in the modern kitchen, a stark contrast to the laborious cooking of the previous era. A busy homemaker could whip up a batch of Jello in minutes, providing a quick, colorful dessert that required minimal effort. You can almost hear the triumphant jingle of a 1950s Jello commercial promising ease and delight. Its affordability also played a crucial role. Sweet gelatin, made with inexpensive sugar and artificial flavorings, was a budget-friendly dessert, making it accessible to virtually every household, regardless of income. This democratic appeal further cemented its place in American and, to a lesser extent, British culinary traditions. It wasn't just for grand dinners, it was for everyday family meals, school lunches, and hospital trays. The Stammbämreich, vibrant colors and appealing wobble sortiner were and still are a huge draw, especially for children. The bright reds, greens, and yellows transformed a simple dessert into a playful, almost magical experience. It became synonymous with childhood birthday parties and school cafeterias. This visual appeal, so central to Victorian aspirations, found a new, more accessible home in sweet Jello. Historians still argue whether Jello's pervasive marketing or its inherent convenience was the primary driver of its long-term success, while the Victorian era saw fruit and meat mixed indiscriminately. Sweet Jello largely stuck to fruit flavors, occasionally venturing into salads with canned fruit marshmallows or shredded carrots. The infamous perfection salad lingered well into the 20th century. But generally, the savory elements were shed, solidifying its identity as a sweet dessert. So while the complex savory gelatin molds of the Victorian era became historical curiosities, the simple sweet Jello marched triumphantly into the 20th century and beyond. It shed the pretension of its predecessors, embraced convenience and vibrant playfulness, and found an enduring place in the hearts and on the tables of millions. As you consider the long reign of sweet Jello, you might find yourself looking back at its strange Victorian ancestors with a mixture of bewilderment and perhaps a touch of morbid curiosity. This leads you to a curious contemporary phenomenon: nostalgia for the bizarre. In our modern era, with its endless appetite for novelty and a penchant for rediscovering forgotten oddities, these strange Jello salads of the Victorian era have found a new kind of appreciation, moving from historical footnotes to objects of fascination and even playful culinary recreation. Imagine scrolling through social media or watching a cooking show today. Amidst the gourmet dishes and trendy recipes, you might suddenly stumble upon a video or an article showcasing a meticulously recreated Victorian aspic, perhaps a shimmering fish mold or a curious ham and pineapple jelly. This isn't usually presented as fine dining, but rather as a delightful, sometimes horrifying journey into the past. You might feel a mix of revulsion and a strange urge to see how it tastes, even if just a tiny experimental bite. This modern fascination is multi-layered. Firstly, there's the sheer visual spectacle. In an age dominated by visual content, the elaborate, often gravity-defying Victorian gelatin creations are inherently shareable. They're weird, they're wonderful, and they're unlike anything most people encounter daily. The glistening surfaces, the suspended ingredients, the often unsettling combinations. It's all prime content for generating clicks and comments. You can almost see the WTF comments rolling in on a video showcasing a perfect tongue in aspic. Secondly, there's an element of historical curiosity. These dishes offer a tangible, albeit edible link to a bygone era. They provide insight into the tastes, values, and technological limitations of the Victorians. Recreating them, or even just learning about them, is a way of understanding the past in a unique sensory manner. It prompts questions: why did they eat this? How did it taste? It's a way of exploring history that goes beyond dusty textbooks. Historians still argue whether this modern nostalgia is a genuine appreciation for historical culinary traditions or simply a symptom of an insatiable craving for online novelty. Thirdly, there's a playful, sometimes ironic, culinary experimentation. While few would genuinely put a jellied calf's head on their dinner table for a regular meal, there's a niche appeal in trying to recreate these dishes, perhaps for a themed party or as a challenge. Chefs and home cooks experiment with modern techniques to improve upon the originals, perhaps using lighter stocks, fresher ingredients, or more palatable flavor combinations while still maintaining the iconic wobbly form. It's a way of celebrating the eccentricity of the past, often with a humorous wink. So the strange Jello salads of the Victorian era, once a peak of culinary sophistication, then a subject of ridicule, are now experiencing a renaissance of sorts. They've transcended their original purpose to become symbols of historical eccentricity, objects of visual delight, and subjects of playful modern reinterpretation. They remind you that even the most bizarre culinary trends can in time become fascinating artifacts worthy of a second curious look. From the modern fascination with culinary curiosities, you now gain a broader, more empathetic perspective, allowing you to begin re-evaluating Victorian taste. It's easy for us, with our highly refined and often globalized palates, to scoff at the strange Jello salads of the past. But to truly understand them, you must suspend your modern biases and attempt to grasp the unique set of circumstances, beliefs, and aspirations that shaped the Victorian palate. Imagine the world the Victorians inhabited. It was a time of burgeoning industrialization, yet also one of significant scarcity for many. Refrigeration was a luxury. Fresh produce was seasonal and often difficult to transport, and the understanding of nutrition was still nascent. In this context, gelatin wasn't just a quirky trend, It was a practical marvel. Its ability to solidify liquids meant that broths and stocks packed with nutrients could be presented in a novel, appealing way. It allowed for the preservation of cooked meats and vegetables, making them last longer and appear more appetizing. You can almost see the practical gleam in a Victorian cook's eye as they realized the possibilities gelatin offered for efficient meal planning. Furthermore, the Victorian aesthetic was one of abundance and intricate detail. Their homes were filled with ornate furniture, their clothing was layered and embellished, and their gardens were meticulously manicured. Their food naturally reflected this. A shimmering, intricately molded aspic or jelly wasn't just food. It was an extension of their decorative sensibility, a centerpiece that showcased their dedication to domestic artistry. To them, the visual appeal was as important, if not more so, than the taste. It was about creating a feast for the eyes as much as for the stomach. Historians still argue whether the Victorian emphasis on presentation compensated for what we might perceive as questionable flavor combinations. Consider the role of texture. We often prioritize crunch or tenderness. The Victorians, however, seem to have a particular fondness for varied textures in gelatin, provided that in spades. The firm jiggle of the jelly contrasted with the soft meat, crisp vegetables, or smooth fruit, offered a multi-sensory experience. What we might find off-putting, they found intriguing and delightful. The idea of a cold, firm, quivering substance as the base for a savory dish was simply a different culinary norm, not an inherently flawed one. Their palates were also conditioned by different flavor profiles. Sugar was becoming more widely available, but the strict division between sweet and savory that dominates modern Western cuisine wasn't as rigidly defined. Recipes passed down through generations often blended these elements. The Victorians were accustomed to dishes where fruit might appear in a savory context or where a hint of sweetness balanced a robust meat dish. Their sweetened savories weren't necessarily a culinary mistake, but rather a continuation of older traditions and an adventurous spirit. So, as you reevaluate Victorian taste, resist the urge to judge through a purely modern lens. Instead, try to appreciate the ingenuity, the artistic ambition, and the practical considerations that shaped their culinary choices. These strange Jello salads, far from being simply bizarre, were a logical and often brilliant response to the technological, social, and aesthetic realities of their time. They truly offer a fascinating window into a world where flavor, form, and function coalesced in wonderfully unexpected ways. Having gained a more nuanced understanding of Victorian culinary preferences, you can now begin to search for the deeper, often unseen, culinary logic. Behind these seemingly bizarre Jello concoctions, it's easy to dismiss them as mere oddities, but beneath the shimmering surfaces and strange combinations lay a practical, economic, and even philosophical rationale that made perfect sense in their historical context. Imagine the Victorian household as a self-contained ecosystem where efficiency and resourcefulness were highly valued. Animal products especially were not wasted. Every bone, every scrap, every piece of gristle held potential. Gelatin extraction was a prime example of this resourcefulness. By boiling down parts of animals that were otherwise unpalatable or difficult to consume, Victorians were able to extract valuable protein and nutrients, transforming them into something easily digestible and visually appealing. The calf's foot jelly wasn't just a delicacy. It was a clever way to utilize an otherwise discarded part of the animal. You might compare it to modern nose-to-tail eating, but with a much more elaborate presentation. Consider the practicalities of food preservation and service. In an era before modern refrigeration, aspics and jellies offered a stable, firm medium for serving cold dishes. Meat, fish, and vegetables encased in gelatin were less prone to spoilage. Though not fully preserved, the gelatin created a protective layer and far easier to transport and slice at a buffet or picnic. The coolness of a well-chilled aspic on a hot day was also highly desirable. It was a functional solution to real-world problems, making food safer and more manageable for entertaining. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation was truly preservation or simply elegant presentation for cold dishes. Furthermore, the Victorians possessed a keen appreciation for contrasts and novelty. Their lives, while often regimented, also sought moments of delight and surprise. The unexpected blending of sweet and savory in their Jello salads, which seems so odd to us, was a deliberate attempt to create a multi-layered sensory experience. It was about challenging the palate, offering a moment of intrigue. A ham and asparagus aspic, followed by a lemon and raspberry jelly at the same meal, highlighted the versatility of the ingredient and the cook's ability to orchestrate a complex culinary performance. The rise of gelatin also coincided with a growing interest in scientific advancements and domestic science. The ability to transform liquid into a shimmering solid felt almost magical, a testament to human ingenuity. Cookbooks were filled with precise instructions, almost like scientific experiments, on how to achieve perfect clarity and set. This desire for precision and mastery, reflected in their elaborate molded forms, was a deep-seated cultural value. You can almost hear the satisfied sigh of a cook when their intricate mold released perfectly from its form. So when you look at these strange Jello salads, don't just see a bygone oddity. See the culinary logic, the resourceful ingenuity, and the cultural values that underpinned their creation. They were practical, they were artistic, and they were perfectly suited to the unique world of the Victorian era, embodying a pragmatic elegance that makes them, in their own way, truly brilliant. You've journeyed through the shimmering, often perplexing world of Victorian Jello salads, uncovering their ancient roots, their social significance, and the curious logic behind their creation. Now, as our journey nears its end, let's reflect on gelatin's strange legacy. The lasting, if sometimes unsettling, impact these wobbly wonders have had on our culinary imagination and our understanding of food history. Imagine for a moment that parallel universe where savory aspics never faded, where a jellied fish mold is still a commonplace sight at dinner parties, and perfection salad remains a culinary aspiration. Our modern palate, with its strong divisions between sweet and savory, would be utterly bewildered, constantly questioning whether to reach for a fork or a spoon. The fact that this never quite materialized, that these particular Jello salads largely disappeared from our tables, is a testament to the dynamic, ever-evolving nature of taste and culinary convention. Gelatin's legacy isn't just about the specific dishes, however, it's about its role as a culinary canvas. The Victorians saw in gelatin a medium of incredible versatility capable of transforming the mundane into the magnificent. It allowed them to play with form, texture, and presentation in ways that few other ingredients could. This spirit of playful experimentation, this desire to push the boundaries of what food could be, continues to resonate in modern cuisine, albeit in different forms. You can see its distant echo in molecular gastronomy's foams and gels, or in the intricate plating of modern dishes. Furthermore, the story of Victorian Jello salads offers a profound insight into the cultural values of an era. They were more than just food. They were reflections of wealth, social status, domestic prowess, and an era's particular aesthetic sensibilities. They tell us about a time when ingenuity in the kitchen was highly prized, when waste was abhorrent, and when a meal was as much a visual spectacle as it was a means of nourishment. Historians still argue whether the fascination with gelatin reveals a deep-seated human desire for order and control, even over something as ephemeral as food. The strange combinations, the meats with fruits, the vegetables and sweet jellies, also challenge our modern culinary biases. They force you to question why certain flavor pairings are accepted today and others are deemed anathema. It's a reminder that taste is not universal or timeless, but rather a product of specific historical, social, and technological contexts. What seemed perfectly logical and delicious to a Victorian might be utterly baffling to us, and vice versa. So, as you drift off, let the image of a shimmering, possibly pineapple-studded ham aspic gently recede. Its legacy is not just in its peculiar recipes, but in its demonstration of food's power to embody an era's aspirations, its ingenuity, and its unique, often baffling charm. It reminds you that history, even in its most jiggling forms, offers endless discoveries. The lights are dim now, the hum of the fan a gentle lullaby. The last of the strange, shimmering images of Victorian Jello salads are softly fading from your mind. No more wobbly beef tongues, no more perplexing ham and pineapple concoctions. Just the quiet assurance that history in all its peculiar glory has tucked itself away for the night. You've journeyed through tastes and times, and now it's time for rest. Let your thoughts settle like a perfectly set jelly, and let the gentle calm of sleep embrace you. You've explored the past, and now the present fades into a peaceful night. Sweet dreams.